Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Scott Luton and Constantine Dino Limbarakis here with you on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's live stream. Dino, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Scott. Just getting back on a Monday here, right? Get the week kicked off.
Absolutely. Looks like you've been reading some good books back behind you. Lots of
Yes.
books. Have you read all those books?
Some of them halfway through.
Well, hey, it's great to have you back
Thank
here.
you.
A lot of folks may recall you live up in the Chicago area, been doing big things in global supply chain for quite some time, and looking forward to having you here with us monthly
Yes.
in the months ahead. So, folks, get ready to buckle up. Now, Dino, we
Yes.
got to give a tip of the hat. Greg White out on assignment today.
Yes.
Has several full plates, but he's here with us in spirit, undoubtedly, and that's a good thing, right?
Of course, with his Johnny Cash shirt or whatever shirt he's donning on today.
Whichever one, it's a cool one. So,
oh yeah, for sure. He's always got that suave look. I like it.
Always. Hey, but on today's show, as our audience, as you come to expect, it's a Supply Chain Buzz, a live show that comes at you every Monday at 12 noon Eastern time. As always, we're going to be discussing a variety of news and developments today across global business, really. And hey, want to hear from you. So give us your take in the comments throughout the show. And if you're listening to the podcast replay, which I think we usually publish every Friday, hey, we'd encourage you to join us live on a session on LinkedIn or YouTube or other social media channels of your choosing. We'd love to hear from you. Right, Dino?
Yes, for sure.
Now, in just a couple of minutes, we've got a special guest. This is going to be a very unique edition of The Buzz. Not only do we have Constantine with us, but we also have Mike Griswold with Gartner, who's going to be joining us here in just a minute. And Dino, as I shared with you in the pre-show, one of our longest running series is Supply Chain Today and Tomorrow with the one and only Mike Griswold. And that's been going, I bet we're 3+ years in producing that series. That's once a month. So you and I both are in for a special treat today, right?
Yeah. Well, in the age of the podcast era, that's a long time. Right? I mean, that's impressive. So.
That is right. All right. So before we bring in Mike and for me and Mike and Constantine dive into the news of the day, I want to share a few resources with all of y'all. And by the way, we get to welcome in one of our longest, Aaron, we've missed you. Aaron has been a part of our programming for probably at least 3 years and would pop in from time to time. So great to have you back in. And we're happy that you remembered to tune in as well, Aaron. I'm trying to remember what part of the country that you're in. Try to remind us if you would. All right. So, Constantine, a few resources for our global audience. And we'll start with this one. With that said, that we published over the weekend. Now, Dino, did you know that July 16th, it's already a thing. It is AI Appreciation Day. Did you know that?
I did not know it. I guess the question is what part of the AI we appreciate.
You know what?
It's going to just keep growing, right? I mean, it's going to have multiple days in the calendar, I guess.
It's so true. But I like this image. And to folks, you may be listening, you can't see the image. You have to check out the video. But it's a very, very scary robot saying, "You will appreciate me, Dino. You will appreciate me." So y'all check out. With that said, 22,248 subscribers to that newsletter. That's about 41 editions old, and we appreciate every single one and all the feedback that we get from across that community. Now, with that said, Constantine, to one of our next live events, which is tomorrow. Dino, we're all trying to decode digital transformation these days, right?
Yes. We are.
And what it means for your organization, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, what is, transforming, it's a constant, transformation is constant, but how are you doing it and where are you doing it? I'm really interested and excited to listen in on this tomorrow.
Yes. Dino, you took the words out of my mouth. What are you doing? What actions are you taking? So join us tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern time to welcome back Lyle Ekdahl and our friend Greg Davis. Who's going to be speaking to Greg and I about charting a path forward, very actionable insights, of course, sponsored by our friends at Next World. So y'all join us for that. And then finally, one other session we've got Wednesday. We're going to be talking freight, Constantine, freight. Specifically, with Zengistics and Stone Distributing. And by the way, if you like really good beer, check out Stone Distributing. Dino, I know that you and I both are a fan of an adult beverage or two, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It depends. Are you a lager or an ale guy? That's the question that I have for
I am anything cold.
you. There you go. There you go.
But hey, we got to lift up the supply chain behind those that allow us to enjoy our favorite adult beverages. So join us on Wednesday at 12 noon as we explore really the successful and the innovative partnership between Zengistics and Stone Distributing, and how the Turvo organization plays a really big part in that reimagined relationship. So join us there Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time. Okay. Before we bring on Mike Griswold, I want to share a few folks here. That's right. Aaron, Dino, the Pittsburgh area.
Yes. Hail to Pitt. I went to Pitt for grad school. So there you go, Aaron.
That is right.
Scott. Yes.
That is right. Thank you for reminding me. So Aaron, small world. It's always smaller when you start looking around, right? Korai Koze is back with us.
Oh,
yes. How about the headshot, Dino? Look at that headshot.
He's looking studly in that picture there. He's
man,
professional. So
it may not be a good time to be talking Hollywood right now, and we hope that all sides, figure that out. But that looks like a Hollywood shot to me. And he says, finally got time to catch up with my favorite supply chain infotainment. So we look forward to reconnecting with Korai Koze soon. Let's see here. Carlos is talking about AI. Already has a day. Wow. Darlene, great to have you here. Looking forward to connecting with supply chain professionals. Great to have you. Nazreen from Iran. Great to have you via LinkedIn. Mohammed from Pakistan. And Aaron celebrates We Love Pitt.
There you go.
I should know the mascot for Pitt. Panthers.
Panthers, yes.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah,
good. All right. So with all of that said, Dino, what's one thing? Let me ask you this question before we bring Mike on.
Sure.
What is one thing that you are most looking forward to about today's conversation? I'm going to put you on the spot, Dino. What's one thing that you're most looking forward to?
Well, there's just so many topics, Scott, but I think you keep throwing back the idea with this conversation we had about the Walmart and the AI negotiating. So that's just stuck in my head. So I guess it's that. It's just, I'm interested to see what we have to say.
That's right. We're saving the best for last. And folks, speaking of that story, just imagine trying to negotiate with this guy or gal. He's you're gonna do as I'm told, as you're told. So we're gonna unravel that enigma as we work our way through the buzz here today. So stay tuned for 4 or 5 interesting stories and takes of what's going on across global business. Okay, so Dino, with no further ado, I want to welcome in our guest today. You ready to go?
Ready.
Buckled up?
Buckled.
Gotcha. Hanging on to your socks?
Yes, I have socks on. Yes.
Yeah. All right. So with all that, I want to bring in our special guest for today's Supply Chain Buzz, our dear friend, Mike Griswold, Vice President and Analyst with Gartner. Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Hey, great. My wife and I lived outside of Pittsburgh for 5 years in the early 90s. So I love Pittsburgh. She's a huge Steelers fan. I am not, but it's a great place. The people are nice. It's a great sports town. Have nothing but fond memories of Pittsburgh.
Love it. In the early 90s, that'd be the days of Bubby Brister, I think, quarterbacking those Steelers teams, maybe, huh?
Yeah, it was a couple of things, Scott. One that will be near and dear to your heart. So the Penguins, I think, won 2 out of 3 Stanley Cups in the early 90s. But the Pirates and Sid Bream, it was just they just could not get past your Braves in those early 90s.
I am so glad you mentioned that, Mike. I was just reminiscing this past weekend about that. And if y'all could indulge me just for a second, that 92 Pirates team was one of the best, I would say, in probably modern franchise history. You got Doug Drabeck, who was a Cy Young winner and dominating that year. They had a young Barry Bonds. You had Andy Van Slyke in center. You had Jay Bell at short. You had Stan Belinda coming out of the pen. I mean, they had a lot of stars on that Pittsburgh team. But then, Mike, you mentioned the Penguins because Mario Lemieux and Jaromir Jagr they dominated hockey for a stretch. And I'm not the biggest hockey guru, but it was tough to deny what the Penguins did there. So thank you for letting me reminisce through those early 90s, Mike and Dino. Dino, quick comment. I mean, you went there for grad school. Did you get enmeshed into the local scene there?
I lived in the area called Shady Side, right down Fifth Avenue, and that was just such an awesome experience because you got Duquesne University, you've got Pitt, and you also have Carnegie Mellon. So it's really quite a campus there, and it's called Oakland. So a lot of people don't know Pittsburgh. It's like, well, Oakland, but that's the neighborhood over there. So it's it's a neat city, and it's got that history, deep history, very Eastern European kind of dug in, and now it's become like a tech city. So. It's really a cool place to visit.
Well, man, we're gonna have to make a visit and do a Supply Chain Buzz live on scene in Pittsburgh.
Yes.
And by the way, Gino, great to have you from North Alabama. Gino Pledger, a rock and roll drummer by night and saves supply chains by day. So great to see you, Gino. And Sylvia, our dear friend Sylvia, tuned in from Charleston, back from her big travels where she visited family in Germany, including her dad, who had some great stories, which we'll be diving into soon. Okay, so we're going to make a hard shift here. We're going to talk about back to school in a second. All right, we got some interesting figures, but I want to start with asking you both, and Mike, we're going to start with you. When I think of those formative years, especially elementary school, when you still would get excited maybe about back to school. When I think of things that really had me doing cartwheels, that is when I'd get a new trapper keeper, folks, a new trapper keeper. Now I never had any of these 6. I think I had typical 80s graphics on mine, but a good trapper keeper to start the year, that was a highlight. Kept everything you needed you could keep in a trapper keeper, and we used to beat those things up dramatically. But for y'all and for Mike starters, what is one thing you remember asking your folks about you thought was really cool as you get back to school?
Yeah, I'll get to that. I just wanted to go back to your AI poster. I think I didn't know it was AI Appreciation Day. If you read the fine print, I think it's AI Appreciation Day brought to you by Skynet. So we just need to be very careful around who's determining AI Appreciation Day. Anyway, to your question, when I was a kid, this would be early, like in the first or second grade when you needed crayons. Right. I always wanted the big box of 64. My parents were like, well, I don't know that you need 64. We'll get you the 16 or the 24. But what I tried to sell them on was the fact that the big box of 64 had its own sharpener in the back. It's like, hey, I won't have to bug you to sharpen my crayons. I can just do it all myself. It never worked.
Vertically integrated.
Yes. Yeah, it never worked. But yeah, that was, and then you'd see your friends who got the 64, and it was crayon envy. So it was tough. But it was the box of 64 crayons.
Man, you really brought me back. I had forgotten about that and the sharpener in the back. So Dino, how about you? Can you top that?
I don't know if I can top it, but I'll kind of use that same parallel of that first, second grade. What's important then? I would say the lunchbox. You bring with the lunchbox. The back was metal, and then they started going to plastic, and you're like, did you have the Superman or the Super Friends or the Marvel wasn't as popular then. He was like Super Friends. It was DC. And then you always had like the cool movie, right? Starsky and Hutch, I remember. So my cousins had the Starsky and Hutch, or, something, the Dukes of Hazzard. If you think of it, we're talking like, that was what was cool back then.
That's right. That's
and
right.
It came with its own thermos.
Yes.
Right.
Thermos. And then, you didn't want I was the youngest of the bunch, so I didn't want the handovers, but then every once in a while you got the hand. And I think my favorite one was the Knight Rider one.
Oh, man. That's taking me back. I had the Fall Guy lunchbox.
Fall Guy.
The Majors, if y'all remember that series back in the day, right?
Yes.
And just one other little blurb, Marvel and all the superheroes wasn't cool yet because they hadn't figured out how to make, until Superman, right? The big with Christopher Reeve. That's when they finally figured out how to make a great superhero movie. If you remember, in the 70s, they had a really bad Spider-Man movie that I think went straight to TV and failed miserably. Yeah. But once they figured out that formula, There's no shortage of trapper keepers, lunch boxes, and you name it with Marvel, with any kind of superhero on there. But Constantine and Mike, thank you both for taking me back. Mike, I think you were about to add something.
Yeah, I can just see Catherine backstage Googling lunch boxes and all that kind of stuff. She's way too young to know what those are.
That's
way
right.
too young.
What's a lunchbox?
What's a lunchbox?
All right. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right. Well, we're going to stick with this theme of going back to school because in our first story, I'm going to share this graphic really quick. Our friends, first off, it's hard to believe it's time for back to school. We've got just a couple weeks left here, at least where we live in Georgia. And according to the experts, spending on supplies is projected to hit record levels. According to data from our friends at the National Retail Federation, John Gold, hope this finds you well, and Prosper Insights and Analytics, via the story from Retail Dive, spending for kindergarten to 12th grade is expected to reach $41.5 billion, Dino and Mike, up from $37 billion last year. But wait, hang on to those socks I was telling you about, Dino, because for college spending, that's expected to reach $94 billion this year, only about $20 billion more than last year. That is remarkable. Mike, what's your takeaway when it comes to school spending, impact on global supply chain? What are some of your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The somewhat skeptic in me says some of that I think is inflation.
Yes.
In terms of the disparity of the number. I would never argue that it's not going up. I think a couple of things that I think are challenging for the supply chain is I'm thinking in some ways the mix of what people used to buy coming out of COVID, more people at least contemplating homeschooling, which is going to be a different set of supplies than if you're just bringing stuff back to a traditional school environment. So the basket, if you will, I think is going to look a little bit different than maybe it has in the past. But I think, it's the same thing to a degree that we've talked about in the past here, which is the demand signal, right? The demand signal got skewed during COVID. I think it's still in some ways skewed even to today for things as simple as paper, pencils, and pens, the trapper keepers, right? The 21st century version of the trapper keeper. So how we think about the demand signal, I think, is still a challenge for us. And now you've got people deciding how to go back to school a little bit differently than maybe we saw 3 or 4 years ago. So all of those things, and I think to some degree, even the conversation we're going to have a little bit later about where the stuff comes from, right? All of that, I think, is factoring into, our ability. And I think time will tell if we're able to match that anticipated demand. We'll see. All right. But I think those are some of the things that I think are going to make it a little bit different this year than maybe we've seen in the last couple of years.
Yeah. Good stuff there, Mike. Dino, what would you add to that?
Well, having 2 kids in college, the one thing that I'd be interested in, they're trying to incorporate into some of these numbers, how do they accommodate for kids that are paying for tuition and then kids that are not in the campus environment? So, rents. I've just negotiated rents with my daughters who are moving to a new apartment, right? So if you think about that, that's a big part of your cost. So you have your room and board and your tuition. Room and board, it's like after that first year, second year, kids are like, I don't want to live on campus anymore. And, considering my kids are in an urban setting in Chicago, that's a big deal. And I'd be interested to see those numbers. From a high school perspective, and to your point, Mike, we were talking about transformation earlier, right? That transformation of the classroom has a big impact on what they're buying today, right? So it's no longer maybe the crayons and the pencils and the pens and the paper, which we're all saying let's be more sustainable in the classroom. It's iPads, it's computers, it's all the digital stuff that gets quickly obsolete. And they're saying, well, I need a new one now, right? And that's another aspect. So are you giving the brother, the older brother is giving it to his younger sister or brother because they don't want that anymore and they want something faster? Because they also want a game with it too on the big iPad. I mean, I don't know. That's part of this, I think.
Right.
Yeah,
Right?
no, I agree completely, Dino. If you think about it's a great point. I mean, if we think about what the traditional back to school shopping list looked like even 4 years ago, right? You could probably go because I think Staples and Office Max did a great job of creating kind of that shopping list. Here's what your kid is going to need. 4 or 5 years ago, you're exactly right. Laptops, iPads, tablets, none of those things were on that shopping list. Now, I think they're on every shopping list, regardless, even when you get down into, early elementary school, right? There's talk about tablets and those types of things. And you're exactly right. Yeah, the hand-me-down thing, I think, might have worked kind of in my generation. Today's generation, that's the hand-me-down is like a 4-letter word. It's like, no. So I need my own.
I'm assuming now. Here. It's been a long time since my brain has entertained seriously anything related to college. My kids aren't there yet, right? I got my oldest is going into high school this year, so we're still a few years away. But I'm assuming that these days there's no expensive textbooks, that they just buy a license for the version on their computer. That's my hunch. Is that how it works? Constantine, Mike, do y'all know?
My experience, it's a combo, because sometimes some of the professors, they want you to buy their books or whatever.
Interesting.
Because they're the ones writing it, so they want to push it. But I would say, to your point, I mean, this idea of going back to the bookstore. I remember when I was in college and like returning all your books and getting the pizza money that you wanted. That concept is like, it just doesn't exist anymore, right? I mean, you printed all the stuff and you just don't do that anymore. So,
we got to keep going down this memory lane, because do you remember when you take your books back at the end of the quarter or semester, whatever, and you'd be surprised on that one book that got you like $40 back, and you thought you're rich.
Yes.
You got money to go out with for weeks. Mike, you're nodding your hand. That relate? You can relate?
It does. Anecdotally, I'm well removed from having to buy college textbooks, thank goodness. But we did take. Dino, just maybe real quick for your background, I coach girls basketball. Okay. People that have seen this know that probably ad nauseum about me, because I talk about it a fair amount. But we took a group of girls to the University of Utah for a basketball camp, and a group of them wanted to go to the bookstore so they could buy University of Utah apparel.
Yeah.
So the college bookstore now, the bottom floor is all apparel. There were books on the top. But I agree with you completely, Dino. There's a shift towards, and Scott, that electronic medium. I don't think it's completely gone away. As you think about maybe some of the more books that want to have graphics, whether it's an engineering book or a chemistry book, I think some of those types of books lend themselves more to like a physical picture that you can, flip back and forth to. But yeah, the girls wanted nothing. Well, and it also, they liked to go because they had a Starbucks.
Right.
So, but it was all about the apparel in the whole bottom of the bookstore.
Love it. Look at some of the comments here. Let's see. First off, Latarsha, welcome in from South Haven, Mississippi. Will from Naperville, Illinois. Naperville. My bad.
Yeah,
up near where you are, up in Chicago land. Now, Will says textbooks are still a thing. They're very expensive. Aaron says, my son's going to be a freshman in college this year, and all of his books for the first semester are all online.
There you go.
Maggie says, most of mine were online. Those ebook licenses can be super pricey as well. And Catherine, behind the scenes, big thanks to Catherine and Amanda. Catherine just finished up her MBA. Congratulations, Catherine. And she said all of her books were electronic. How about that? Awesome. Okay, so I knew that combination of news and memory lane was going to have us chatting for a little while. So I want to move right along. We got some other really cool stuff to get into. And Mike, you kind of alluded to our next story here. Let me tee this up here. So second story here on the supply chain buzz, we're seemingly in the midst of a reshoring tidal wave, as reported by CNBC. Now, China concerns have been around for quite some time as companies have sought to diversify from a long-time dominant China-only strategy, right? That's not news. But that compounded by things like Russia's invasion of Ukraine and many other issues that are still disruptive and presenting other layers of complexity, global trade, production, shipping, you name it. And then on top of all of that, you've got countries like what we're seeing here in the U.S. they've ramped up incentives to bring manufacturing back to their countries or what have you, trying to make it easier, right? UBS, the financial services firm UBS, polled some 1,600 executives a few months ago. 78% of those executives based in Europe and 70% of the executives in the U.S. plan to move parts of their supply chains closer to home. So, folks, and Dina, I want to start with you here. When you think of reshoring and seeing some of the things that we've seen, really going back a couple of years now, what are some of your thoughts here?
I think it's a confluence of a couple things. One, COVID, the ongoing repercussions of COVID. Two, accelerated changes in the geopolitical framework. When we're looking at this dynamic now of emerging of, I'm going to pull my academic hat on from graduate school days at Pitt, where we talked about hegemony, right? Had this idea of a hegemonic power. It's like, well, who's posturing here between China and the United States, and trying to go for the sphere of influence, right? For 60, 70 years, the sphere of influence, is Soviet Union, United States. We had that. We won the Cold War. Now you're still dealing with this with China and an economic front. And I think the challenge here is, where are these global value chains going, and what are we trying to do with how we're trying to manufacture, the idea of low cost? And you have this transition of China going from a manufacturing economy to a consumption economy. I mean, if you just look at the list of cities in China of the population that's more than 5 million people, it's incredible, right? I mean, it's at least 20 or 30 cities that have that alone. And it makes New York look like just another city. Right. So, and you have all this influx of luxury goods and other types of things where the Chinese consumer now they don't want to have any interest in manufacturing. And so, of course, their price is going to go up for manufacturing, and it's going to get offshored on top of all those other geopolitical aspects of, that's also happening. So I think that it makes sense. It's this pushback now to say, well, we don't want to be subject to China, so we want to go somewhere else to get our manufacturing done.
Right? Dina, that is a salvo of insights and observations. Mike, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I agree completely with the observation. We did a survey not too long ago. 74% of people said they were doing something around redesigning their network. 51% were around adding to the network. A lot of our research has been focused on this idea of a China plus one strategy. I think Dino makes great points around who is the plus one, though, and where is the plus one. We're going to talk a little bit, I think, in an upcoming segment around places like Costa Rica and other places. So I think it's if someone hasn't thought about that plus one strategy, they're probably behind the curve. But to me, the secret sauce is who's your plus one or plus two, right? We've seen a lot of emphasis on regionalization, both from an organization structure, right? So it used to be centralized. Now we're seeing more companies trying to push decisions down, more locally where decisions can potentially be made better. But I think it's this idea of diversification is here to stay. To me, though, the bigger question is where do you diversify, and what, Dino mentioned cost, which is certainly a big one, but what are those kind of decision criteria that you're going to build to then have that checklist that says, okay, this location, I can check 3 of the 5 of my criteria. This location potentially only checks 1. How am I going to make those decisions? That's, I think, where it becomes important.
Mike, well said. You and Dino, and Mike, I love that your main theme there. Not only who is your plus one, but what is your equation to determining that? It's a $1 billion question. Karak Jose in the comments, and I'm not gonna bring this up because it would cover up half our screen here, but good stuff here. Good stuff from Karak. He says growing protectionist measures hinder the flow of imports and exports quickly. Shifts in trade policies and agreements disrupt supply chains and market access. The possibility of trade disputes and physical confrontations, while mounting uncertainties in domestic and global business environments, all that heightens the overall risk landscape. And then he mentions a couple of companies, Dannon the yogurt company, food company, I believe, in Carlsberg, just lost over $1 billion, Karai says, in assets overnight with Russia taking over operations. Man, that's like a full certification right there in a comment, Karai. Thank you very much there. But it's so true. A lot of what you are sharing is so true. But who is your plus one and what's your equation to getting there? So let's move. Mike, you alluded to this next story that we're diving into, because some companies are determining their plus one is Costa Rica. So this comes to us from our friends at the U.S. Embassy in Costa Rica. So a second cousin, I'll call it, of reshoring is nearshoring, where we have seen tons of activity there. But, Mexico is an example. And, of course, pointing out that in the Western Hemisphere, the relationship between Canada, U.S., and Mexico is very unique around the world, and it's created a lot of opportunities. Costa Rica might be the newest beneficiary of the next round of chip-related nearshoring. The U.S. federal government, led by the State Department, and the government of Costa Rica are exploring a partnership that will lead to new production of semiconductors, all powered by the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022. Now, one little side comment here, little business history. Intel had moved chip production from Costa Rica to Asia back in 2015. And then in 2021, just 6 years later, the company announced a $350 million microprocessor assembly and test plant in Costa Rica. So what's old is new again. And Mike, I'll stick with you here. Your thoughts around Costa Rica for some being the new plus one.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about Costa Rica. I mean, I think you could play word association, and chip manufacturing in Costa Rica would never come together, right? It's a vacation. They're number one, I believe. My wife and I were there a couple of years ago. I mean, their number one industry is tourism. So if you think about setting a chip manufacturing plant in Costa Rica, what is that going to do potentially to their number one industry, which is tourism, first of all? I think Costa Rica notwithstanding, if we think about that checklist of who your plus one is, I think things like, skilled labor, however you want to define skilled, right? I don't know what it takes to make chips, but is there a willing and able labor force to be able to take advantage of whatever manufacturing you're putting in a location? So to me, I don't really have a perspective on Costa Rica per se. Intel is one of our top 25 companies. I know they do a lot of research around this. So if they ended up in Costa Rica, I'm sure they did a lot of due diligence around that. But, to me, it's does someone want you there? That's probably first and foremost. To some of the points that Karai made, right? The last thing you want is to try to put yourself in a place where they don't really want you for whatever reason, right? It could be what you make. It could be what you make. It could be just frankly who you are, right? And then do you have the labor? I think the other thing to think about, which isn't, I don't know, it's necessarily a Costa Rica challenge, but if you look at some of the moves over in the Far East, Vietnam and those areas, typhoons and hurricanes, right? So you're going to go from China, which has one set of challenges, to another area that's potentially got natural disaster challenges, right? So that checklist, I think becomes really important. And it will be interesting to see how that is embraced within Costa Rica, both by the people and then that number one industry, which is tourism.
Yes. Excellent commentary there. I think labor, do the government want you there? What are the incentives? Access to energy, certainly access to water for anything chip related, chip manufacturing related. But Dino, what would you add? What's your reaction to Costa Rica jumping in here?
So having visited Costa Rica a few years back, people think Latin America, Central America, tourism, which is absolutely spot on. But the thing about Costa Rica we have to keep in mind is it's probably got the highest literacy rate of any country south of the United States.
Wow.
It's invested tremendously in education. They don't have a standing army. They are huge soccer fans, by the way. But the point I'm trying to make is they're very much into, I would almost call them somewhat of the Switzerland of of Central America and South America because of the high literacy rates that they have there. And so if you have a dealing, again, supply and demand and low cost, there's a reason why companies like Intel had decided to invest there. So you've got a highly educated labor force. The cost of probably doing business is low. It's in the same hemisphere. And so they're playing off with this idea of where they may want to try to do manufacturing. And you're also seeing a little bit of this with China playing this game in Brazil. So that's part of the reason why they made a lot of investment in South America. You're hearing about this story with the new president in Brazil being chummy with China. So it's an interesting play. Like, who's going to be the sphere of influence? South America and Africa are going to be the two places in the world that we're going to really want to watch. So if we're going to take influence in Costa Rica and have that become an offshore for manufacturing, it's an interesting dynamic. And I was quite surprised by it, to your guys' point, but it makes sense when you look at the infrastructure and what they're trying to be as a country in their region, given our influence over them and how we work with them. Right.
Well said. Hey, Central and South America both have been good recipients of these nearshoring trends. It's been really interesting to see new operations setting up overnight, and then the results they're getting. So we'll keep our finger on the pulse. Certainly all things chip related. That's been fascinating to see that, all these developments globally and certainly in the Western Hemisphere, and especially what's going on down there in Costa Rica. By the way, and Cobra, we're just going to have a fourth panelist here today, but I like his comments. Cobra says, Groundhog Day, I had the Intel case in grad school. Intel, a case study of foreign direct investment in Central America back in 2000. Time flies. That's right. Time flies. All right. Really quick, want to make a quick blurb. We're all about resources here at Supply Chain. Now, I want to make sure, folks, we shared a couple of events on the front end, but join us this Thursday as we dive into a case study. When you get TMS and ERP integrations right, the impact that can have on simplifying and making your shipping really, really successful. So join us at 12 noon Eastern time for that. The link to register is in the comments. Okay, man, Dino and Mike, y'all jump right in. You're quite the dynamic duo. I'm not sure who's Batman and who's Robin, but y'all make a great combo here today. And I want to get into this. This is going to be a testing. This is going to test my statement I shared here. So, Mike, one of your last appearances here, of course, we shared the Gartner Supply Chain Top 25 for 2023, which came out just 45 days, month and a half ago, two months ago or so. So, folks, we're going to drop the link that you can download the full list there from the team over at Gartner. And we're also going to drop the link for when Mike joined us last, where he dove into some of his key takeaways from the top 25. And we got the pyramid, the magical pyramid, iconic pyramid visually displayed right now. So here, Dino, as you dove into that research and then some, and you look at some of the brands and logos and organizations represented, what's a couple of your observations on the top 25, the supply chain top 25 for 2023?
Well, the one that took me a particular interest is I was looking at Schneider Electric, an old colleague of mine who was I worked at Corcentric, used to work there, and I looked into them a little bit, and it's kind of one of those companies, and you're like, you know of them, but you don't know, they're not as familiar as a consumer brand. And I went and looked at their site. I looked at a lot of the information, and they've really dived into this. This isn't a grammar class. It's
nope.
If you see the way they present themselves, and they've invested a lot of time and effort into the idea around the sustainability and what they're trying to do to promote electricity and promoting how companies use electricity. And it makes total sense to me where they've always constantly been this leader. Because it's something that they're trying to always achieve, not only for their customers, but they're also, they're drinking their own Kool-Aid, right? They're doing what they say they're doing as part of their business. And I think we'll continue to see that, whether you're putting the framework around ESG, which I still struggle with around that acronym, but broader on the sustainability. That is something all of these have in common. And how are they trying to innovate with that? That's what's key. How are they using that to their advantage? And I think that's probably some of the criteria, Mike, that you guys were looking at, because that's important beyond just saying I'm checking the box.
Right.
It's something that is transformative as part of what they're really trying to do, and making money doing that, but doing it in a way that is going to be for the future, not just saying we want to make a list.
Right.
So I can truly see that about these companies and what the list that's there.
Well said, Dino. Mike, I'm going to get you away in just a second, but just to clarify to our listeners out there that may be listening and not watching. So Schneider Electric came in at number 1 of the top 25 list. So Dino was talking about that organization. And Korah evidently is a big Tesla fan. Tesla came in at number 14. So Elon Musk famously said, I'm going to paraphrase his comment, man, this supply chain stuff is pretty tricky. Well, they're figuring it out slowly, but surely. Hey, Mike, you heard Dino's commentary there on top 25, and of course you've offered up some of your key takeaways. What else comes to mind?
Well, I think Dino hit on the Schneider Electric observation is spot on in terms of their transformation journey. They like many others in the top 25 have done a really good job of articulating what does transformation look like for them, and then making progress towards that. I think when I look at those companies near the top of the list, they do not succumb to what I would call the shiny object syndrome. They have a transformation roadmap. This is what they're going to embark upon. Yes, there'll be course corrections, for example, with COVID as an example. But in general, they're highly focused on what they want to accomplish. The other element that I want to speak to, and Dino alluded to it, is 50% of the methodology is really a community perspective, their peers, as well as the Gartner experts. And Schneider does a great job, Dino pointed this out, of talking about what they're doing with their supply chain. Now, if you look at that, you could argue that it's just a lot of stuff. And I would say it is. But it's a lot of stuff that relates to what they're doing, how they think about the supply chain, their willingness to share with the rest of the community to try to give everyone an opportunity to raise the level of their own supply chains, which is part of the reason we built the top 25, 19 years ago, was to raise the entire supply chain profession. And I think Schneider's a great example of someone that, yes, they're highly focused on what they want to do, but they also recognize that as someone that has a good supply chain, they have a responsibility to help others and help others raise the level of their own supply chain.
Love that. Well said. And again, we want to celebrate 19 years of great work that I believe, just one person's opinion, truly has elevated the industry, and it's given tons of research and content and some of the formula out for folks to study and improve their own organizations. I should also point out here, if the Gartner Supply Chain Top 25 is new to you, please use the link we dropped in the comments and go check it out and download your own copy to the Gartner material there. But I want to point out, so while Schneider Electric is the top of the list, over to the right of the pyramid, you see Amazon, Apple, P&G, and Unilever, and that is the masters category. Those are folks that basically, Mike, have been doing it so good for so long, you had to create a special category. Did I get that right, Mike?
That's pretty close, Scott. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Excellent. All right. A lot of good stuff there. Dean, I'm going to give you the final word before we start talking about the company on number 9 of the rankings. Your final word there, Dino. I know this is not new to you. It certainly has elevated industry, right? Would you agree, Dino?
Yeah, I think it's raised an awareness of how companies are understanding what they're trying to do, and it creates a little competition, right? I mean, if you see a logo there and you're a direct competitor, obviously that's a great way to try to promote and keep things going. There's a great book that I read a few years back by Paul Kennedy. It was called The Rise of Nations, and it was talking about the reasons why competition in Western Europe made it such a way that drove innovation, and it forced people to think a different way of trying to accomplish tasks that have been done the same way for hundreds and hundreds of years. And in this case, it's acceleration of people are seeing supply chain. Now they're saying, okay, if I see somebody on that list now, because supply chains become strategic, not just shipping something, it's post-COVID. Everyone knows what supply chain is. I think it's even become more important because it's going to be that driver saying, I want to outdo my competitor. So you guys are kind of doing a service to the market in some regard that way too.
Love it. Great work, Mike and team. And we look forward to the next one. And, Mike, if you can't notice, Dino, I love his perspective of supply chain from that history point of view. You see those two worlds coming together?
Yes.
I love it.
Yes.
All right. So as I mentioned, number 9 on the Gartner supply chain top 25 list is our friends at Walmart. And there's a particular development that hit my radar late, I'll admit, but in the last week or so. And this comes to us via the PY, probably the payments magazine, PYMNTS. In the technology world, as Greg likes to say, you got to misspell things to be cool in the technology world. He says that a lot. Anyway, so I want to dive into Walmart. So this year, Walmart has been using a chatbot developed by the company Pactum to negotiate cost and purchase terms with some of its vendors. The retailer has limited the experiment largely, and Dina, I think you got an update here, but mostly to smaller contracts as well as for only equipment that Walmart uses. But the early results are pretty promising. Some 75% of Walmart's vendors, per the headline here, prefer dealing with chatbots. That's interesting. And the automation, this is my favorite part perhaps, has allowed Walmart's procurement teams to work on more critical and bigger deals, creating more value for the company. Now, before I get y'all two to respond, I guess this image here is what we can come to expect with what supplier negotiations are going to look like in just a few years or maybe a few months. All right. So, Mike, let's start with you. Your thoughts here of what we're seeing with this experiment with Walmart.
Yeah, it's not surprising that Walmart is doing this. If you kind of just casually watch the headlines, Walmart, while obviously a very successful retailer, over the last probably 5 years has also been a very successful acquirer of technology. Everything from things on the customer side to now working with things on the AI side. It's interesting kind of where this is starting. If we go back to the early days of things like the marketplaces and the auctioning sites that were used, they started very similarly with those types of purchases and creating an auction environment for things like equipment and supplies. So it doesn't surprise me that that's the place to start. I think that we've always, from a Gartner side, seen this idea of AI and machine learning really as an augmentation, and in some instances an automation tool. I think what Walmart is doing is probably an early indicator of one of the ways that maybe we would celebrate AI Appreciation Day is the fact that they can do some of these types of contracts and these types of negotiations that are relatively straightforward, right? Think about equipment. They've got a pretty well-defined specification. There's probably not going to be a lot of deviation in the specification. You can automate those discussions. Walmart certainly has an idea around, what they think is a price they want to pay for that product or service. You can build that into the tool. So to me, this is probably an early indicator, right? Again, if we think about the supply chain top 25, right, what could other companies learn from this? I think they're on to something. The bigger question will be, where does it make sense to go next? And how do you manage that transition into, say, other categories, other types of products? How do you manage that? And again, what's the criteria that you might develop that says this is a good candidate for a chatbot negotiation? This is a bad candidate. We would never do that, right? So that the organization itself has those guardrails. But I think we probably should have seen this coming at some point, right? That this is a natural kind of use case. We talk at Gartner a lot about, use cases. Some instances you have, I think blockchain is a great example of a problem running around trying to find a use case. I think this is probably the opposite, right? This is a well-designed use case for AI.
Yeah, well said, Mike. And you mentioned, I'm coming to you next, but quick comment. You mentioned how Walmart more and more in recent years has really become savvy with incorporating new technology, acquiring new technology, working with startups and the like. You can see those results in the drone advantages, drone delivery advantages they've gained over their big rival Amazon. But I would also add, just my opinion, I've noticed Walmart also hiring a lot of Amazon talent and experts and leaders. That's fascinating as well. Dino, so when it comes to this story here, I think you got a kick out of it as much as I did, especially the image. Your thoughts?
Well, one thing, I always find it funny that we try to anthropomorphize AI always, like they always have to have some human body. Like that's one, robotics is one type of AI, but I don't know if we're ever going to get there, because if you think about the concept of the chatbot, we're using this every day in our language when we're talking to Siri and Alexa, right? So that concept, we're always trying to figure out, well, how's this going to replace us? And I think the challenge here that they're solving for is something that was close to my heart, because I had covered this topic when I was at Hackett and at Aberdeen about the concept from procurement for tail spend. So that's really the big issue here. It's this non-strategic spend. It's not the strategic suppliers are talking about mostly. It's this non-strategic spend where you had 2,000 suppliers and they're trying to figure out how to get through all this. So if you can imagine how many suppliers and how many different locations where Walmart has all these facilities, right? And they're trying to normalize the terms and conditions so they can take advantage of their payment, payment days outstanding. So this is a capital management, working capital question, because if they can make sure they normalize that and they can manage that cash more effectively and take it longer on a normalized basis across all of those indirect suppliers, that's a huge working capital advantage for them that they may not have had by not having a way of taking advantage of the AI. And this AI is essentially what the way I've read it is, it's taking stuff that we're familiar with already, right? We understand chatbots because we use them all the time. It takes the machine learning, but it also takes the amount of data. And I've also seen this evolution where it's playing into the contract lifecycle management. So taking in contracts as part of that and trying to make sure then that everything's being negotiated in a consistent way, and knowing that there's a limitation of resources on the procurement side. And they're saying, what you were saying, Scott, is they want to focus more then on the strategic stuff. And they want to have this kind of tactical stuff being managed by machine. So that way they're not being over resource inundated, but at the same time, making sure they're still managing it and they're not, forgetting about it, because then that's where things go awry. And I think that's just my observation of where Pactum, and then there's a lot of innovation happening in this space. And it's exciting to see that a big company like Walmart has embraced it.
It is letting the humans, to your point, to one of your last points here, let the humans do human stuff that they're best suited for. A lot of fascinating. We're going to keep our finger on the pulse. We interviewed a Walmart executive just a month or two ago and really had a fascinating time talking about some of the cool things they're doing from a supply chain perspective. We're going to have to get a procurement leader from Walmart to talk about this, which I had to hang on to my socks as I was reading more and more about what they're doing over at Walmart. And Mike and Dino, we talk about the customer experience and the employee experience, well, the supplier experience. Clearly, they're liking this, and it's effective and it works for them. So we can expect there to be a lot more of it, I would imagine. Mike, I'm going to give you the final word here today.
Yeah, great points from Dino. I think the other thing that it does, and I agree completely around kind of how do you manage the tail around this from a supplier perspective. I think the other thing, and if someone said, so Mike, why do you think the suppliers like it? I think in some ways this levels the playing field, right? It's basically, you're the whole emotional aspect, some of the other, let's call them maybe incentives that one company might offer that another company couldn't, those all go away. Everyone is now on a very level playing field. I think any type of compliance potentially challenges, those are all gone now, because everyone, the chatbot has no emotions. I love, Dino, your observation around whenever we talk about this, we always have to turn them into something that looks like us, right? For whatever reason. I don't know why that is.
It's our nature. Yeah. We want to relate. right?
That's a great observation on your point, on your part. But I do think, that 75, I think it could be because people feel like it's a level playing field now. Yeah. We're all talking to the same chatbot that has the same kind of outcome in mind.
Yeah, and this is obvious, but you're taking emotion and personality out of the conversations. And speaking from experience, that's a great thing at times, Yeah. All right. We got to have the two of y'all back. I'm already looking forward to your next appearance with us, Mike. Usually the first Wednesday of each month. So y'all can find, to our audience, you can find Mike with us the first Wednesday of each month, usually at 12 noon. Supply Chain today and tomorrow with the one and only Mike Griswold. So stay tuned for that. And Dino, you're going to be with us, I think, the third Monday of each month on the Buzz. So I tell you, you and Mike make quite the tandem. But I gotta, before you leave, Mike and Dino, I got to share Mohib. Our dear friend Mohib is back with us. And by the way, happy birthday, Mohib. I think it was your birthday a couple days ago. He says it was good to see McDonald's in the top 20. McDonald's came in at top 20 and the top 25. French fries are not that bad. I disagree. Completely disagree. They're the best in the business. Mohib, but Mohib says they got to improve the supply chain of that really bad coffee to go up the ranking. It's just a non-expert opinion. No offense to the cheap coffee drinkers. Hey, Mohib, great to see you. And thanks for your perspective as always. We're going to come see you in Wichita soon, I promise. All right. So Mike, before we wrap, let's make sure folks know how to connect with you and the Supply Chain Enablers team at Gartner. How can folks connect with you?
LinkedIn, and just drop me an email, mike.griswold@gartner.com. And I just want to echo, Dino, it was very nice to meet you and a great segment.
Yes, you as well. You as well, Mike.
Man, that's high praise coming from the Mike Griswold, Dino. So folks, reach out to Mike and of course, check him out here first Wednesday of each month. And Dino, I think this is your third or fourth appearance now. I think you hit home runs as Mike suggested. How can folks connect with you and all the cool things you got going on?
I'll just have to ditto on Mike there. LinkedIn, email, always open to have a conversation and a debate or whatever that is that you want to talk about.
And talk history from a very educated and passionate standpoint, which I can really appreciate. And by the way, speaking of history, Kora says, hey, Constantine is totally cheering for Greece. Greece is showing the best economic growth in Europe with a 5.5% growth rate, far above the EU average. How about that?
Yeah. Well, they finally turned that around over there, and it's good to see that. That's had an impact in the past few years, considering some of the stuff they had to deal with 10, 15 years ago.
I heard that. Okay, we got to leave it there. Big thanks again to Mike Griswold with Gartner. Mike, looking forward to seeing you next month. And big thanks. We are as well. Big thanks to Constantine Limbarakis, a guest host here and supply chain guru. You can check them both out on LinkedIn, and of course, tune in here as they make their appearances. But whatever you do, folks, as we sign off, hey, deeds, not words. Check out the great expertise that Dino and Mike dropped here today and do something with it. And with that said, on behalf of our entire team here at Supply Chain Now, Scott Luton signing off for now, challenging you to do good, to give forward, and to be the change. We'll see you next time right back here at Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.